I think this is now live. At least I'm hoping. About 30 seconds before 3 p.m. I thought I would just get on a little early and do a little gear check. Can someone put in the chat if they can hear me? Yes or no on the feed. That would be amazing. We'll give that a second to fall in. All right, sweet. Thank you, Luna. Appreciate that. Give it a little bit more time and then we'll get going. Hope everyone's doing well today. I'm coming live from Grand Rapids, Michigan, here in the States. Curious if there are any viewers elsewhere that want to put their location. Where are you all from? Let me know in the chat. That's kind of always fun for me to see who's there and who's not. So, all right. Well, it's about that time. I'm happy to be part of the Azure Global 2021 event. Today I'm going to talk about real-world Azure Static Web Apps. Hi, Mitesh from Toronto. Thank you. That's awesome. My name is Brian McKeever. I am actually co-owner of BizStream, and I guess I can move on to that slide. I have been programming professionally for roughly almost 19 years now. Been doing mostly .NET solutions since way back before it was even .NET. Kind of classic ASP is what we grew up on back in those days and had a lot of fun with it. But I've been using .NET ever since, and now I've been doing a lot more with Azure in the last 5 years or so. Most of the solutions that my company delivers is done in the Microsoft and .NET and Azure world. So that's why I'm pretty passionate about it. And I happen to also specialize in the CMS world for delivering sites that are based on content management systems. So Kentco Experience is one of my favorite content management systems to use. I also do some things with headless CMS as well. And that's kind of where this whole static website thing came from. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, so I don't want to give it away too much yet. But basically, we do that a lot at my company. And again, we're all here based in Grand Rapids, Michigan in the U.S. Love it. Great time to visit is in the summer. Please do not come in the winter. It may not be safe with all the snow and ice. But if you're from Toronto, you may understand that very well. So one other fun fact, and the reason I bring up the weather, is that recently, actually about last week, I took my family to San Antonio. It was 99 and sunny every day, and I enjoyed way too many margaritas. But I always like to say a fun fact about myself to just tell you, well, I'm not a robot. I'm definitely a real person and do enjoy a nice cocktail here and there. So, again, that's a little bit about me, who I am. If you want to get hold of me later, hit me up on Twitter, and at the end I'll throw out some more contact information. But let's get to it, okay? One thing that the organizers asked us to do as speakers at this event is to kind of thank you all for attending. So this slide has a QR code on it. You can scan that and you get a digital swag item that you can use in your Microsoft profile from a learning profile standpoint. I'll be honest, I don't know too much about the learning profile system. I use it a little bit to prepare. I do know it's great content. So if you want to learn about Azure, highly recommend it. I think it's a fantastic thing to check out. It's what a lot of my developers use here at BizStream to get going with Azure. But it's kind of a cool little swag item to just get and download. It kind of looks like what's right above my head. And there's the link on how to get it. And I will provide this at the end of the talk as well as we wrap up. So let's get into the agenda. I am going to kind of work on these 4 main points. And that is kind of, why would we do this? Why would we use something that's static by definition? Because isn't dynamic better than static? Well, most of the time it is, but not always. So I'm going to get into that. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I'm going to introduce the concept of a static website. And then I'm really going to kind of dive into Azure Static Web Apps themselves. We'll go over some of the features and functionality that web apps deliver. And they're actually pretty exciting and pretty cool and very cost effective, which is one of the reasons I like about them. And then I thought instead of just doing a boring technical demo, I'd kind of get into how I use them in a real world scenario on a real project that we did here at BizStream and we had to do very quickly. And it's something that has helped out our organization and our community, and I'm kind of proud about talking about it, so that's why I just thought it'd be interesting to have a session about. So I used Azure Static Web Apps in combination with some other technologies to kind of pull off a site that we needed to do quickly. Spoiler alert, it went pretty well, but there are some things that didn't go well. So hopefully you can learn from my experience, maybe avoid some pitfalls, and I'll save you some time and kind of shorten that learning curve and that gap for how to do it, right? So another reason that I'll go into that real world story. But those are the 4 things I want to cover. So let's get into the first one. Why would we use a static website these days? And honestly, just like everything else that's happened in the last 18 months, well, in this exact scenario, it's because of COVID, unfortunately. Something that came up in our area, in everyone's area, actually, heck, it's a global pandemic, but this spurred on the need to develop an application and a website, and it's one of the primary reasons that we did this, and I needed to pull off this project quickly. And it's something that I didn't necessarily want to stand up a full-blown content management system for, because it's not something that I expected to change often, and I wanted to do it with the help of my marketing colleagues who already had kind of a starting point of a template of HTML that they wanted to use for this product that we wanted to build and launch in roughly less than 10 days. So unfortunately, the pandemic is terrible, and it's had a lot of hardships on a lot of people. But the one thing positive that I can take out of it from last year is it spurred some innovation, and it helped us get some projects done quicker and help some companies maybe solve some problems that they were doing on paper. And that just drives me crazy when people use paper to solve problems. So let me talk about this a second. Honestly, what we had to do was build this website. And it's at simreport.com. It's still running. You can go browse it and check it out if you'd like. It's something that is built on the Azure Static Web App offering. And like I said, my Dave was actually my marketing team on this one. He had this kind of website template generating tool that could cut HTML. And instead of kind of having to cut apart the pieces and worry about making it modular and dynamic inside of a CMS, which is what we would typically do if we had enough time, we want to do something very quick, very fast that only needed a couple name changes and a couple value changes and basically just use that static markup. So we had to build this website, and its job was to be a really easy kind of gateway into the application that we built that is called SimReport. And that is done on a technology that's one of my favorites. That's the whole Kentico Experience technology. It's a great .NET application platform. So we built an app that allowed employers to have all their employees come back to work safely and basically do the whole green check mark or yellow check mark thing if you were coming into your workplace during this time because you had to come into the office to do your job, even though hopefully most of you can do your job remotely at this point. You got to remember, this was kind of last year when this started, and no one was really sure, could we come into work or not? So people were still coming in. You had to get screened at the door, and our app called SimReport would do that for employers, and it would track the history of each employee each day, and whether or not they passed their symptom check or they failed their symptom check. So this is the app that we wanted the website to get people into quickly, to make it easy to find, and make it easy to just kind of deliver both of these projects, both the app and the website, and again, in about a 10-day period. So we use Kentico Experience to do that. It's a fantastic tool to build apps on because you can build responsive apps like what I'm showing in the screenshot. But that's pretty much all I'm going to talk about the app, because this presentation isn't really about the app. It's more about the actual static site that's sitting on top of it. But if you do want to know more about Experience, I've got a couple bullet points here. Great from a .NET Core standpoint. Highly recommend it. You can deliver fast and scalable websites as the slide shows. And you can hit me up later if you want to talk more about it. And again, that's all we're going to get into with Experience. This is the form that we needed users to get to create a workspace that represented their building or their office or the location that they wanted to have employees come to do symptom checks. So it's a simple form to start the process. But again, we needed that website to drive people to this form because we wanted to share it on LinkedIn. We wanted to share it on email newsletters. And we didn't really want to just share this form. We wanted to share something that explained the value of the tool. And that's kind of why the website was born. And actually, once they got in as an organization, the next step was the symptom check screening that each person would have to fill out as they came into work each day. Set of radio buttons, 3 simple questions. Do you have symptoms or not? And do you have a temperature? At this point, I'm sure lots of people are pretty used to these questions as we come back to hopefully somewhat normal in your area. Michigan's not great right now, by the way, but for a long time we were, but that's a whole different tangent. So the app and the company could create these symptoms, and then again, what it would do is give you that green check mark that yes, the symptoms are passing, and you can come into work. And this is the thing that I was saying earlier, that a lot of organizations in West Michigan were doing this by paper. They were losing the history of it, and they had no idea kind of what liability that opened them up to. In fact, we'd heard stories of someone getting through the front door with the paper and saying they were fine, but then 10 minutes later, symptoms were appearing. They felt so bad they had to go home sick, and no one knew where that paper was because the person threw it away, right? So having it digital makes that a lot easier to track and respond and listen to. So that's what the app does, and the site gets companies to sign up for to do. But and that's just kind of setting up the scenario for later on about what worked and what didn't. When we talk about the first agenda item of why use static, I want to go back to that a second. I believe that static is the future of the web, right? I think that long gone are the days where we have large installations of SQL databases that power websites that take a lot of processing power to deliver dynamic and highly exciting sites at enterprise scale. So I think the future is more based off of Jamstack. And we're seeing this trend become more and more common in the work that we do for the people across the states and actually even further away. Jamstack sites have basically an idea of we just need markup and APIs to do our job, to render HTML. There's no backend database behind the scenes. It's something that if you need to add dynamic capabilities to, that's where JavaScript comes in, and that's where the name Jamstack kind of came from. You know, J for JavaScript, M for markup, A for API, get Jam. That's the whole idea, right? The benefits of static sites on top of Jamstack as a methodology are kind of illustrated here, in a quick way. They're extremely fast. There's no waiting for servers to respond, right? There's no SQL queries behind the scenes because you've generated every single page already and you know what you're going to serve out. And you can do that over a CDN. So you can do that across the world very quickly, very fastly. And because there's no server behind the scenes, there's very little surface area for attack. That means they're very secure. You can't really do a SQL injection attack on a website that doesn't have a SQL database. And other various reasons of just there's less going on, less moving parts. And at the end of the day, if somebody got into serving static files, there's nothing there but static files. So you're not going to get any personal information. It's just there's a high level of security involved when you talk about Jamstack sites as well. They're also scalable, and something that we talked about, that because they're delivered over CDN, you can get to them anywhere in the world very fast. You can push buttons and you can scale out and shoot them into different places around the world. They're going to be very close to you. That means they're going to be very fast to download in the browser. And lastly, which I think, if you're a developer listening to this talk, hopefully this excites you, Jamstack sites are a pleasure to deal with. Because you know what? You can use your favorite tools. You can use VS Code. You can use Visual Studio if you like that better. You can use Notepad. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, primarily, you're just working on static HTML. Now, in reality, you've got some more tooling involved. You probably have a CMS that may be headless that goes with it. You may have a static site generator, like Static is a great one in the .NET world, or Gatsby might be a more common one. So there's a lot more things that kind of go into it than just Notepad, but generally, from a developer experience, people tend to love working with Jamstack sites. At least I do, and my developers do that I work with here at Bitstream. So that's kind of why I chose a static site to put on top of SynReport.com, because it's fast, it's secure, and it's something that I love doing, and I had a blast building the site, honestly. If you don't know about Jamstack, and that was a new introduction, well, hopefully, first of all, it wasn't, because this technology has been around for a while now. But if it is new and you need to check out more, I highly recommend jamstack.org. It's a great place to go check out the various reasons behind Jamstack, showcasing tools that you can use, like Gatsby, Next.js. There's so many things out there around this world, and you can do it in almost any language that you want. That's another thing that is pretty amazing. It's not like just .NET. It's actually, Node, TypeScript, all sorts of different languages and frameworks have various ways of making Jamstack sites. Again, it opens it up to more developers. But generally, they're deployed to certain places like Netlify or Vercel or now Azure Static Apps. And again, that's why I chose this for this project. So I hope that's some of the background as to why you would want to use static. Again, fast, secure, scalable, great developer experience. Now let's talk about where did Azure Static Web Apps come from as a product from Microsoft, because that's kind of why we're all here, right? This is the Azure Global 2021 event. And I think Microsoft saw this need that was out there to kind of compete with other platforms that are just taking off. Like I mentioned, Netlify is a great way to do this. Gatsby Cloud now has their own engine for doing this. So there's other players in the field, and I think Microsoft wanted to get there too, because they've got some interesting things going on in the realm of delivering client-side based sites. And Azure Static Web Apps was released around a year ago, maybe even less than that, depending on how you count it. And let's talk about what they do, because basically they're pretty amazing. And I'm going to try to get out of the way so you can see the final graph here a little bit. But the whole idea is you just need a repository of code. You're going to use GitHub to do that if you use Azure Static Web Apps, because right now that's the main one it supports. You connect up your repository or your branch of your code to the Azure resource that you define that is a static web app resource. And it gives you, kind of out of the box, a couple amazing features, which we're going to get into in a second. But as you work on your HTML, as you commit it into your GitHub repo, it will automatically trigger and fire off a build that updates the resources in the Azure Static Web Apps system. And you've got your website running at a URL. That's literally all it takes. It's as easy as commit code, wait about a minute, because it takes about a minute to get through the pipeline, or the actions, or however you want to call them these days with GitHubs. They probably changed the name on me again. But you do that, and it delivers the code out to that URL that was running in Azure. And there's some other interesting things about it, that it's not just the HTML. The rest of these benefits really kind of got me excited enough to try this technology out and use it, honestly. But before we get into the exact features, I do think that, again, if you look at this chart here, I'm going to try to move out of the way a little bit so you see the logo. Microsoft also is heavy in Blazor. I think there's probably at least 30 other talks at Azure Global 2021 about Blazor and WebAssembly and where .NET 6 is going with Blazor and the hot reload stuff, in case you've seen any of those. I hope you caught those. They needed a place to host these WebAssembly-based Blazor projects, and I think they wanted to make sure that was done in Azure. So they built this solution. Again, this is my opinion. I don't know this for sure, but my thought is they built this as a way to really leverage the investment into Blazor as a technology to be able to publish it to the world and deliver Blazor sites very quickly, right? So I think that was a big motivation as to why they launched the product as well, and why there's some of the features that are in the product of Static Web Apps. And let's talk about those. There's some benefits. Again, we're not just serving HTML. That's a big part of it. But one of the favorite things is, again, as I just talked about, it's super easy to build and deploy because it's automatically hooked up for you. In fact, when you create the resource in the Azure portal or through the Azure CLI, you tell it what branch and what repository to talk to, and it actually creates the workflow file for you in your repository. And it sets up the CI/CD. And you can still customize it because it's just a YAML file. But it does that for you, which is surprising and actually kind of nice in my opinion. So basically, it's easy mode to get this out to the world. It actually is something that can be globally distributed. As you know, you can scale out Azure resources across different regions and all sorts of fun things there. So very fast, efficient way to deliver static files like images and HTML, which is what we want from a Jamstack standpoint. And the biggest one that's, I think, a differentiator from other platforms is it has automatic integration with serverless functions via Azure functions that are made out of JavaScript. Again, the J in Jamstack. That's kind of why I talk so much about Jamstack. So right away, as soon as you provision the resource for your static web app, it actually automatically stubs in a couple APIs, a good example of how to use that. And I'm going to show that in a second. But you can build more Azure functions. And guess what? You don't have to deal with any of the weirdness that may occur with trying to maybe make your website talk to another domain for the Azure function, because it's all hosted within the same static website. The endpoint to the API is actually just part of your project. So no core stuff, no weird origin header crap to deal with. It's just something that just makes it easy. And building those Azure functions, you can make your static website dynamic. And I'll show that in a second when we get to the demo. It also comes with routing. So this is something that was really helpful for my scenario. and I'll show you that again down the road in the talk. But the routing allows you to kind of emulate, if you ever had to do any kind of routing with like a client-side app with Angular or something like that, or React. There's a routing file and mechanism for doing authentication in your routing, as well as anonymous routing. So, and there's some things you can do to configure that, which makes it kind of nice to basically immediately add authentication. And after routing, you get free SSL certs. So we'll talk about that as well. But that's kind of a cool benefit. And like I said, with the routing, you get some integration that goes with it. And actually, this is kind of an AD or Azure AD sort of authentication that you can just plug in. And it will make sure and handle the fact that these routes should be authorized to this role or not. So you can create roles. You can add those as attributes to your routes. And you kind of get this ability to have a kind of public and private area of your static website, which is kind of neat, right? If you ever need to like edit a profile or something in a real world, you wouldn't want that just open up to the world. And maybe you wouldn't want to handle all those issues yourself with dealing with it. So pretty cool. Lastly, I think this is really cool from a benefit standpoint, is that each PR can become its own staging site, and you can do different environments. So we can figure out the whole kind of live production aspect of our static site, but also look at changes in other changes in other URLs that kind of respect a different PR or a different staging environment. So you can preview those changes as opposed to kind of working with them only in production, which some other platforms have issues like that. So Microsoft did a great job here with, I think, adding automatic staging sites into one of the benefits of static web apps. Hope that makes sense. If you do have questions, feel free to start putting those in the chat, or I have a Q&A time at the end as well. But these are the major list of benefits, so I thought I would go with that. So when you go into the Azure portal, it's pretty easy. You start by clicking Static Web App. I want to make a new one of these resources. I hope at this point you have some Azure experience, so I'm not going to actually explain every single detail of creating a new resource. But when you create one, it dumps you right to this screen. And this screen basically allows you to say, where should my Azure Static Web App be provisioned, what resource group, and what name should it have. The name doesn't really matter. The name can be up to you. I do recommend using a naming convention for these things. And then one thing that's kind of nestled in there in the middle of the screen is that these are actually free right now, because Static Web Apps are still technically in preview. They're completely free. There's no real charge to them. And that's pretty nice, as opposed to having to worry about it. And I've been using it for a year. It's never had a problem the whole time I've been using it, which is pretty cool for a free service. But basically, as soon as you hit that moment of putting in the name of your resource and choosing your region and resource group, you then get the big blue button at the bottom, which is sign in with GitHub. And when you do that, it pops open the authorization OAuth modal with GitHub. You grant it access, and oops, that's a little too fast. You grant access, and it just says, hey, which repository and which branch do you want to connect to? And I'll show that when we get to the real demo. But that's all it takes to set this up, is really create and authenticate to GitHub, pick your branch, and you're off and running. And you basically can get your static code that can look like this right up there into the Azure Static Web App, and you're delivering your site in like 2 minutes. Seriously, it takes 2 minutes to set this stuff up. It's that easy, which I think is pretty cool. And this is actually just a quick sample of our homepage HTML from our static site. But like I said, if you're starting at the beginning of this process, you may have your static HTML. It may be set up the right way, but the minute you actually kind of connect your GitHub repo to the static web app, it will actually push a commit back to your repo and generate a workflow file, which kind of has the ability to kind of set up the GitHub actions for you. So as opposed to you having to like go into GitHub and do it manually and figure out where are the endpoints to push to and configure that file, that's one nice thing about the provisioning of the tools, is it does that for you. And it sets up the actions, and you're all ready to go. And again, it triggers on any commit that you've configured to your branch, and it just goes, right? Totally easy is all I'm trying to say here. And I was surprised at how easy this was. So that's a little bit about static web apps, why they exist from Microsoft's viewpoint. I think now I can get into maybe hopefully some more interesting things, because you could have found that out on your own by just clicking static web apps, right? How did I use them in the real world? That's really what I want to get to as a part of this talk. So, like anything, it was a fire. It was crazy. We were requested by the local health department at Bizstream, because we like to give back to the community. They said, hey, can you guys build us a tool that we can give away to employers and have them sign up for and use to stop this whole paper thing? And again, this is the symptom check at the front door of each organization. And they said, by the way, can you do it as fast as possible? Because we need this. And the community needs this. And we were said, sure, that's, we'll do, whatever it takes, and we'll make it happen. But this was a fire. I mean, this was us working late nights for about a week to get this stuff out there and get it launched and ready. So we needed to move very quickly. And like I said, as I just kind of explained before, when you have the ability to just pick a repository and a branch and click next, that meets quickly, right? We can deploy that stuff super fast once it's ready, and even do multiple deployments over and over and over. That's I would hope that in today's world on your projects, you're doing CI/CD and you're doing automatic deployments every time that you're making changes in production. There's no reason not to, honestly, even with complex systems. So again, that makes the workflow file. It is just standard YML, and this kind of is what it looks like. There's some fun things in here, which I'll get to in a second, that actually are interesting to know. But it's familiar technology is what I wanted to also get across. It's something that's pretty easy to make happen. So that's the file it created once I hooked up that branch. From there, when you're finished provisioning, you actually get a URL, just like you do in any other, like maybe like a traditional Azure App Service. And that's actually kind of right above my head. So I'm going to move out of the way so you can see. You can click that endpoint or that .NET URL. And that's the thing that your website is up and running at, right? And there's no configuring servers. It literally just works. It generates a dynamic one every time. Happy Flower is a great name. There's definitely some fun names that it comes up with, but that's it. You're done at that point. You've got that HTML I showed you right to that URL, and it just works. So if you hit that URL, our page came up. This is the copy of the site, and you're off and running. And your API sits underneath that if you need it. And we'll get into that in a second. But that's all it took. And it was very fast. So, like I said, the routing aspect is one of the benefits that I relied on heavily. Because what we wanted to do at BizStream is come up with a way to have a different top-level domain of simreport.com or www.simreport.com. But underneath, we wanted it to be app. Which is traditional a common pattern for having a software as a service product that runs at a URL. You have your marketing site over here, and you have your application down at a different domain. So what I wanted to allow is not confuse users, because what they were doing is hitting a certain URL to get to the workspace. I would hit /bizstream to get to BizStream's workspace on the app. Well, I wanted /bizstream to go inside the app. I didn't want it to go on the WW site. So here's where routing comes in. And the routing allowed us to kind of set up certain URLs that matched the marketing site to keep you in the marketing site, but all other URLs we could redirect to the app. And I'll show that more in a second. But the routing looks like this. It actually adds a JSON file in your repo with a routes array or collection, however you want to term it. And as long as you say, here's the route, and you can do wildcards like the second one shows of /admin/star. Here are the roles that can talk to that route, and whether or not they're authenticated by which role, which is what the second allowed roles attribute is showing. That's how you can control the routing around your static website. And there's the link here at the bottom of the page to kind of get to that. Again, I'll probably make the slides available on my site after the talk, but this is key to understanding how to handle the routing. But again, it's optional, because if your static file has the index.html or the /profile.html, it will still pick that up and it will still work. This is to do like more advanced routing for virtual routes is the way I like to think of it. So you can control that almost like if you were doing a React app or something. But to try to help visualize what I just said, we have the website here on a mobile version of it. This website, simreport.com, is the marketing site, and it has the ability to get people to the app.simreport.com, which is the app running in Kentco Experience. So you hit that to get to the second part of the app in the middle of the screen, and eventually that is where you take your symptom check as an employee. So what I had to do is use routing to go from this blue button that's underlined to this screen, which is actually at a different domain and different application, so that people could basically do their symptom check, right? And that was done with each organization gets its own workspace slug. So like I said it here at the bottom, it's like simreport.com/bizstream to get to the app. But the website shouldn't handle www.simreport.com/bizstream. So it's really, if you type that in, we're redirecting you to the app to make it easy. Trust me, it's easier than what I just made it sound. But eventually you get to the check there as the employee, and it just works. So that's one awesome reason why static web apps helped me, because it had that capability just pretty much out of the box. Now the other thing that we wanted was an API, which we wanted the ability to pull data from the system that was the application itself and present that on the marketing website. And we wanted to make our static web app dynamic. And as I said at the beginning, one of the benefits is you can do Azure Functions with static web apps. And out of the box, when you first provision it, you will get this message API. So running at /API, a GET request to message will return you a message from your code. And it pretty much just works, which is pretty cool because it's actually a whole serverless function behind the scenes. Yet the only thing you have to worry about is the actual guts of the function. So that was there. That's another reason why we used static web apps to do this, because we had a future goal for pulling that information. And there's support in the Azure portal to see what functions are tied to your project and also to handle different environments. So what I'm showing in this example is that when we're on the functions setting of the first blade there, get message was picked up in our repository, and we've tied it first to the production environment, and that's where that environment there is at the top. And as soon as you have a function or two in your code repo, you can actually create more than one environment. You can actually set up like a dev, test, stage, or local. But for this demo, what I'm about to go into, it's just the production setup. So, and what I mean by finding the code in the repo is that it kind of gives you this. So it generates the get message JavaScript-based Azure function, and the core of that is inside of index.js, which is right there in the middle of the top left of the screen. That gives you the, oops, sorry, I missed one of the red marks there. That at the bottom left, it is the function that says hello from the API. That's what we saw in the preview a second ago, which is really simple, right? We're just responding every time to the get message or message call with hello from the API. And then your static HTML can have just a simple call to using like the fetch API to API message, and it returns that on the screen. And that kind of gives you this scenario, right? So if I hit that page of index.html, it calls the API returns, and there we go, right? So instead of just talking about it, let's break out and actually do something different, and I'm going to show you this a little bit more. So I'm going to jump into a demo. And just to prove this is a live demo, I'm going to refresh the Azure portal. I have provisioned a static web app already for us for today's purposes. And as you can see, the first thing it does is give me everything I need that I've been showing you so far. So I have a URL that runs the website code. And right now it's super simple. This is kind of like what you get out of the box, right? It's just dead simple HTML. In fact, if we look at it, It's dead simple HTML. But what's interesting from there is what you can do next, right? So I've got that tied to just a quick repo. And in fact, I'll show you. Here's the repo in GitHub. Here is that dead simple HTML. Now I have changed it a little bit to not do the hello world example. I wanted to do something a little bit more real, just to show you all like the possibilities here and actually show off a couple more of the features and functionalities. So if you notice at the bottom of this, and I'm hoping that that's not too small, I could actually probably zoom in, but basically it's really simple in terms of there's a fetch call, and I'm returning into text content actually some very specific code from our Kentico Experience app that has the data of how many workspaces are in SimReport. So that's the index.html. Again, it kind of makes a folder called /API. Inside of there is our get message function. And I didn't change the name because honestly, a little bit in a hurry. I didn't want to worry too much about names. But generally, the idea is you're working on this folder, this file, sorry. And index.js has our code that we want to run for our serverless function to make our static web app dynamic. In there, I've changed it to actually fetch another server's API. So I have an API running at our SimReport, and actually I commented out here just so you could kind of see it. This is a call that allows us to see how many total workspaces are active in our site, and think of workspaces as companies that like use the product, just a total number, right? And instead of actually just hard coding the URL, I mean, I'm leaving it in here from a demo standpoint, but what I have is actually some application settings that are injected into the Azure function, so I don't have to hard code stuff into my code repository, right? We don't want our secrets in there. So that's one of the other benefits of using the serverless approach that Azure Functions gives you is the static web app system has a way to do application settings in many ways. You can do it in your standard .NET Core way of having your file in a secrets system on your local, or you can actually use the configuration to define application settings, pull those into your code through environment variables, and that's what process.env is. That's an environment variable that you've actually defined back in your resource. So I'm going to go to configuration, and as soon as that loads up, you'll see that I have a couple different application settings. I have application insights, which that's something new. Actually, I should mention that too. I'll get to that in a second. But I have two different application settings that actually have our values. I'm not going to show them, but that's just the value to where the API endpoint is and the value of the security hash so I can actually get the data. You define and you can manage those, again, per environment, because I can have different environments in this if I want to. And at the end of the day, what it does, well, I guess I'll show it. What it does is make me my JSON file of my application settings, right? So we have our name and our value, and you can edit all that. And I'm going to change the hash right after this, so don't worry, it's not going to be valid any longer. But in doing that, if we go back to our repo, you'll see those are the same names from the application settings of the configuration. That's in my JavaScript, in my repo, and I'm fetching that URL, and I'm just parsing out the response to JSON, and then using that back on index.html inside of this. So this fetch is calling myself as the Azure Static Web App, and that serverless function is calling out to the other app to get data. So I'm doing double hop, but now we don't have to worry about cores or stuff like that. And that gets us the fact that we have 101 here. So if you watch really fast, if I hit refresh, it started out with like a ... because the static HTML loads and it's waiting for the JavaScript to finish. And you can speed that up to where it's kind of more seamless and you don't even see a flicker. But I'll do it one more time. That flicker, it called the API and it replaced the ... with the number of workspaces in SimReport. So we've had 101 different organizations that show up in SimReport that use it. So that's pretty cool, right? We can make dynamic content appear on our website, even though it's a static website. And you can do more advanced things for sure. This is just like the dead simple example to just kind of get you started in that. So I'm hoping that makes sense. Again, it's all about what's in your repo in that API folder. there are one thing to note. If you're going to do the fetch inside of the function, like what I'm doing here, I am requiring node fetch. Node fetch is just a lot like the browser fetch API that's in browsers. To get that to work, you do have to have that as a dependency, which I'm hoping makes sense in your package JSON. So I've just added a dependency. And again, the default value is going to give you just lines 1 through 8, and 9 will be empty, and so will 12 will be empty. But I just added in node fetch as a dependency, and because every time we do a commit, we're doing a full build and an npm install or restore or CI or what start happens, whichever command it is. Sorry, I'm not exactly a pure JavaScript guy. That handles restoring the package for you on the Azure Static Web App side. What happens is that if you go back to your overview, you can see this is all very interconnected. The fact that the GitHub repo knows about the Static Web App and the Static Web App knows about the GitHub repo. If you go back either way to your action runs, you can see that every time I've kind of committed these files, it takes about a minute and a half to deploy, and that would get me that node fetch npm package. So pretty standard web development stuff at this point. The whole goal is not really to talk about the development process, but just generally show off the fact that it's pretty simple to do this stuff, right? I did also mention as another app setting, there is application insights, and it puts in the instrumentation key. If you're not familiar with application insights, go check it out. It's a great way to do basically almost free monitoring of your website and what's going on with your website or application. So by default, this is not turned on. So I recommend turning this on. You provision an app insights resource when you turn it on. So this demo site, I have it hooked up to, and you enable it, right? So once it's enabled and we go back and look at that resource right here, you start seeing things like server requests and time to load the page, and if there's any errors, and you have live metrics. I mean, this talk isn't about application insights, but this is a pretty cool tool I really recommend on anything that you're doing in Azure. Use application insights, whether it's Azure Search or app services or any other the PaaS type resources. You're going to get great monitoring, great history, alerts, logging, and again, you can actually just fully integrate that with your static website in, I don't know, like 2 seconds, because you just click create and enable, and it just works. Another benefit of static web apps. Okay, so there's a little bit of a demo. I'm going to switch back to the talk here a second. And there it is. So we just went through that example. We got through how the API works just in a very simple way. And we talked about configuration. I showed that a little bit. The other thing, for back to my story of why I chose this and why I used it in the real world, we wanted something that was secure. Again, this is data about employees you're collecting. Did they pass a symptom check or not? So our system needed to be secure. That's really why we went with Azure as our hosting platform for this project, as opposed to just some other random server. We wanted something that was HIPAA compliant, and Azure gives you the ability to do that. And having a static website kind of plays into that. Again, there's no surface area for attack. So definitely something that I think is useful, but not a huge talking to exactly why. I'm just saying it helps you be more secure by using this technology. So that's a lot of the ways it helped me, but there's also the ways it didn't help me, because again, I was kind of learning this technology as we went, and there are some things that made me want to pull my hair out, which now I'm hoping to save you from. So if you see the deep sigh on this one, raise your hand if you enjoy dealing with SSL certs. Total tangent. This is kind of where I wish we were all in person and not all remote for this conference, because I'd love to see the audience feedback. So if you want to raise your hands, just maybe +1 in the chat or something if you're listening. But I don't expect too many people to actually raise their hand, because if you love this stuff, you're crazy. I hate dealing with all the issues that come with TLS 1.2, 1.3, 1.1, and all the other weird stuff that can happen with SSL certs. And just in generally, every time we have to deal with them on a project, I just kind of try to pass it off to my other teammates. Say, hey guys, can you just deal with this for me? I don't want to deal with it, right? Well, Azure Static Web Apps helped me out quite a bit because they deliver on their promise of free SSL certs. In fact, when you add your domain name, there's this ability to add custom domains. And you simply add in your custom domain, you add a CNAME record into your DNS system to prove that you own the domain. And instead of having the random, Flower Hill name or whatever, you can actually have it work at, simreport.com. But if you look closely, it's actually kind of saying, hey, you need a www or any subdomain to do the automatic free SSL cert and to set up the custom domain, because you do the custom domain first and then the cert just comes with it. And I went, well, wait a minute. I don't want to run at www. I actually want to run more just simreport.com. And actually, originally we were doing to do simreport.io or something like that. So we didn't want the www. And honestly, I got into it and I was like, I look at the documentation. Here's a picture of the documentation. Even their documentation says, oh yeah, you need www or other subdomains to make this work. And if you want naked domains, sorry, we don't support that. What do you mean you don't support that? That drove me crazy, because we didn't really, we want to have either just one thing, www, or naked. We don't want to have both, right? And we don't want to deal with different ways to do SSL certs. So, and this was like the night before we were supposed to go live when I was working on it, and I was really, really stressed out by this, honestly. Instead of trying to figure it out, I did whatever any good developer would do, and I started to Google, how in the world am I going to fix this issue? And I came up with a solution thanks to Google, which I'll call it here. But if we don't have naked domain support, things look like this, and I was a very unhappy camper, right? I was getting this message over and over on my browser, and I did not want that to happen. So I had to figure out something, right? I had to make it work with just a naked domain or at the www. One of the two I had to make work, right? Enter Cloudflare. And I know you may think, wait, why are we going to talk about Cloudflare? We're already using Azure. Do we need two clouds? How crazy is this? Well, yeah, it's a little crazy because Cloudflare offers a technology called CNAME flattening. And I had literally never heard of this before. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. I have never heard of CNAME flattening up until last year. And it's pretty cool, actually, what it does. So for free, this is part of the free DNS offering that Cloudflare has. It will actually allow you to add DNS entries, proxy through their system, and you can use this to manage your DNS. And it gives you the choice to either just handle DNS or use proxied DNS. And what I'm showing here is actually the actual configuration for SimReport, and the fact that we want SimReport as a naked domain to now kind of flatten into www. So if you look at it, what I had to do is create a very weird DNS configuration to point those two things together to make them work as one. And I had to switch it to proxied as a proxy status in this screenshot, because it was something that the user interface doesn't make it quite clear that you can actually change from DNS to proxied. So I had to figure that out a little bit. But once I did that, as requests come in, Cloudflare handles the fact that I need to take either www or non or naked or whatever and make that all one thing. It does that for me just out of the box. And then that's what made the free SSL cert work at www inside of the solution, right? And that is what I made my custom domain at. This is the preview of the custom domain from the actual www.simreport.com. I'm letting Cloudflare handle the DNS to flatten those things, so that even if somebody requests naked simreport.com, they get pushed to www. And that's pretty cool, because I didn't actually know you could do that with Cloudflare. So, I mean, honestly, when you look at it, those two things together, pretty cool. That's pretty hot. I'm really impressed that I now have actually two cloud providers working on my solution, and I'm not really paying anything for static web apps. I'm not really paying anything for Cloudflare. That's pretty awesome. So I can't take credit for this. Burke Holland, github.io, this is the post that has it. This has been out there, I think, since static web apps came out. It's literally the only documentation resource that says, here's how to do it. And finally, Microsoft, I actually noticed a couple weeks ago, they actually updated the Microsoft documentation to point at this blog and say, hey, if you want to do root domains or naked domains, go check out how to do it via this blog post. So thank you to whoever figured that out originally. And if you want to know how to do it, that walks you through how to do it using Cloudflare and static web apps. So cool resource. I wouldn't have been able to finish this without that. So I'm really in debt to that person. So where else it didn't help me? It did not help me in the routing aspect of things. Luckily, there's one special thing called platform error overrides that you can control 404 routing. And I'm actually using that in a very janky way. I'm not very proud of this, but again, I wanted to have any URL I wanted to redirect from www to app. So this is my routes.json file, and in there is something that's ugly because Azure Static Web Apps, the routing is supported internally for internal routes, but it's not supported, the big red not sign, not supported for external routing. So I can't take an inside page and redirect it somewhere else. And there's probably like a good security reason for that. But I really wanted to go from my static website at www to app. And that just failed me. So I had to come up with a crazy situation like this. There's actually a redirect file in my repo that replaces the www site with app. Please don't try this at home. This is not a great way to do things. I would recommend maybe looking at figuring out a different way, but just generally the routing, while cool, really made me pull my hair out from an external standpoint. So there's one gotcha to look out for. Again, I'm going to go back. It works great for internal. It does not work great from an external standpoint. Okay, so there's that. Doesn't work. Really bummer. But again, that's the thing that made me go from www to app. And that's kind of what this screenshot is showing. So I got it working the way I wanted it to, just not very proud of the way it works. Then there's also this crazy thing of 416 errors. I mean, does anyone even know what a 416 error is? I had never heard of it. And it's even reading the definition from the schema, the spec, is still, range not satisfiable. I was getting this when I was trying to share my SIM report www pages on LinkedIn. And it was looking like this. And I was like, what in the heck is going on? I was trying to pick up the metadata from the HTML, as any good, marketing site has these days, open graph tags, metadata, all that kind of fun stuff for sharing. And it just wasn't working, but yet it was working perfectly for my local host. I could share localhost to LinkedIn through ngrok, but I couldn't do it with the Azure Static Web App. So actually, I made an issue on GitHub and the project for static web apps, and they fixed it for me very quickly, actually. I made it June 11th last year, and they fixed it on June 22nd. I thought that was pretty cool. They actually was looking at the thing, and they were like, oh, yeah, this is an actual bug, and they fixed it for me. So pretty cool. It now works. You can share it. Another cool thing about the technology is recently, and I'm talking like within the last month, they have added a CLI tool to make the development experience with Azure Static Web Apps even better. So the SWA CLI is its own CLI that will allow you to do the bullet points, and you can hit the GitHub location of this tool to use it for find out more. But basically, it allows you to run localhost and emulate the behavior of the static web app, which means you can emulate and debug through your serverless functions that are, your /API/message or whatever. And you could kind of have that full developer works cycle or methodology that you love, where I can debug locally, and once I'm proving everything's working, I'll be more confident when I deploy it and make it commit to my main branch and get it up there. So this is cool. It's new. I just thought I would add it, and I wish that this would have been here a year ago. But thank you to whoever did it too, because that's pretty cool. So again, there are ways that the technology helped me. There are ways that the technology got in the way. I think it's perfect for hosting static sites. I would encourage you guys to check it out. There's tons of documentation on what to do and how to help things. It is still in preview though. And originally there was some issues with like how big these things could be. 100 megabytes doesn't seem like a lot until you start putting in maybe heavy images and things like that, which I wouldn't recommend in a Jamstack world anyways. Your images should be coming from something like another CDN or maybe a headless CMS like Kentico Content or Contentful or something like that. So there's easy ways around the size limit, but they did up that to 250 megs. You can only have 10 of these in one Azure subscription, which again, I don't see that being a big issue, especially with all the benefits that I've just talked about. So to me, bottom line, Azure Static Web Apps, totally worth it. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I was really kind of happy with kind of how they worked, and we still use them today. So, I mean, honestly, all you got to do is get started, go to the portal or go to the marketing site, click the button. There is actually also, sorry, this slide, there's a VS Code extension for static web apps, which I use. That makes it seamless to work with, inside your favorite editor, which is most likely VS Code at this point, to see the resource, to deploy to it, to make commits. It just kind of makes it easy to work with. So if you're using VS Code, highly recommend that along with the CLI. Both have a couple different uses. I just thought having some tools made sense in this at the end. And with that, that's really it. I want to thank you all for coming to the session. My contact info is up on the screen. If you ever want to get a hold of me, you can check out my blog at mcbeeve.com, which is linked here. Follow me on Twitter at mcbeeve. I hope today that you've learned a little bit about Azure Static Web Apps and why they're pretty awesome, why I recommend them. Definitely hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference at Azure Global 2021. And in fact, I told you I would put up that slide for where to go get the swag. So there's the QR code. You can scan that to get your swag. Again, that's pretty much it. That's my last slide. I'll stick around for a couple minutes for questions. If anybody has them, just throw them in the chat, or you can hit me up on Twitter. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And with that, thanks for coming. Again, I'm going to stick around just a minute or two for questions. There's so many questions right now. I don't know if I'll be able to handle them all. There might not be any questions. But anyways, I hope you all liked it. And we will, I guess, just call it good. Thanks, everyone.